Hey guys, welcome into the Bear With Us podcast. I am Jack. He is Frank. You can follow us on Twitter at Bear With Us Podcast, at JSavio505. I don't remember what it is now. Oh well. Frankie G Lyrical. No. You're Frank Maggs now.
I am.
You've upgraded.
I've upgraded.
You went from rapping to playing video game. Guys, listen. Frank, before we started recording right now, he was begging me. Jack, come on. Can we please talk about the Cubs? I want to talk about the Cubs. I want to talk about Wilson Contreras and Ian Happ. I want to talk about, and I'm like, no, Frank, I'm sorry. We changed the name to a Bears podcast. We're sticking with the Bears. And he's like, all right, fine. And then he pulled up. He's like, all right, now I'm going to punish you by reading some Mitch Trubisky tweets. So, Frank, you have some quotes for me regarding Pittsburgh Steelers QB1, Mitch Trubisky.
Yeah, so it was really interesting. He had I think it was a podcast episode actually. And he, they asked him just about his time in Chicago, his time in Buffalo, and he sort of expanded on both. And this is the quote that he said about his time in Chicago. We won a lot of games. I made a lot of big plays. I contributed to those winning teams, and I knew I was the leader in those locker rooms. People can say whatever they want about it, but I'm proud of the work there. Here's where it gets juicy here, Jack.
Okay.
I would say, I guess the question was like, what is the difference between Chicago Bears you and, Pittsburgh Steelers you? And he said, I would say I process quicker now. I know where I want to go with the ball. I'm able to just trust my abilities and play a lot more free, not just go where the coach wants me to go with the football. I think it was a lot along the lines of just having a trust. Okay, they must have missed it. It was a lot of things in Buffalo allowed me to have like trust and being on the same page with my offensive coordinator. I felt like being in Buffalo, the quarterback had a lot of free reign to go where he wanted with the football and go where he wanted with his reads, as opposed to Chicago. And then he said this was the last thing. Even if you got a completion in Chicago, I felt like sometimes it wasn't necessarily what the coach wanted. They put you in a box a little bit more than you wanted to be. And I think that restricts you as a player. It's just different experiences. In the end, we still won games. It's just different team to team.
Okay. Two things. One, this is already going to have the Mitch fanboys coming out here be like, it was never Mitch. See, we told you. It was no, it's still both of them. Mitch sucked. Mitch sucked in Chicago. With that being said, though, that really pisses me off because Matt Nagy was brought here to do one thing, and it was to make Mitch into an all-pro quarterback. Again, I think that's just another tick under the Matt Nagy is a phony column. Like, damn, that really sucks. And it kind of, I can't even say I'm really that surprised based off of two things we saw last year. Number one, Andy Dalton seems like that type of player who necessarily wouldn't want to kind of go free reign and sort of rogue in the offense. He seems more like that timing-based, route-based offense that everything needs to be perfect for him to sort of succeed. I think that was seen in Cincinnati. I think it makes a lot of sense in what he was doing here in Chicago. And then on the in that same vein, I think Fields is more of that feel type quarterback where he's like, all right, I gotta know where I'm going, but I want to feel, I have to feel that it makes sense. And Mitch was kind of that same quarterback. It's not really surprising to hear him say that, Frank. Well, I mean, these are my raw initial thoughts. Obviously, you've been kind of sitting on this. What did you first think when you saw him say that? Where you couldn't have been surprised. There's no way. You and I have never been super different in our thoughts on Mitch and the whole offense.
No, my thoughts weren't very different than yours, but it was so ironic because my dad had called me. I think it was the day after the very first training camp practice. Oh man, like I'm liking what I'm hearing, and the conversation went to. He's like, man, I really hope this coaching staff doesn't do what they did to Mitch. And he never was like bought in on Mitch super hard, but the one stark difference that he picked up on, and this is someone who like he watches Bears games, he watches other games, but he's a very big football fan, but not like a nerd like me and you. You know what I mean? Like it's more of like the dad football. You know what I'm saying? Like
right.
A little more meatball. But he was like, I remember him in 2019, like, why is he scared to run? Are the coaches like, it feels like he like you could visually see that he was like overthinking things versus like year one, it was like he'll do a read or two and he's taken off or throwing the ball away or something. Whereas like year two and beyond, it felt like he was being forced to go through 3, 4, 5 reads when it was clear he couldn't do that. He remarked it in his statement of like, I feel like I process things faster now. It was very clear he couldn't read defenses while he was in Chicago. It just was what it was. So if that first or second read was there, he would make a good throw. Like he has good arm talent. And so like seeing that made me think of not only what my dad said a few years ago, but literally a few days before I read that that article that was talking about that, or what that had him quoted anyway. And I was like, that just sort of confirmed what I thought was happening. Because the stance that me and you have always had is like, no, after year 3, maybe even 4, it was like, yeah, he's not the guy. He can be a really good backup. He can be a serviceable starter in the perfect system. Maybe Pittsburgh is that system for him. But he isn't that guy, but he can do things on a football field. When you think of what we were sold on with Matt Nagy and seeing like what actual offensive genius and Kyle Shanahan has done with like way less talent than a Mitch Trubisky, like why couldn't we work with his strengths and win more, or even like have a more fun offense? It was like that was sort of the stamp on it for me, that it was like, I think they both weren't very good, but I think Nagy was worse at his job than Mitch was at his.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I would agree with that. Again, you're totally right. We saw it in that second year, and it goes back to something I think we talked about when we like first started this podcast. I remember talking to you about this because it wasn't just Mitch who could not pick up this offense. Nobody broke out in this offense. Allen Robinson was Allen Robinson, at least in the first, 3 years he was here, when he was actually caring about the team. But he was a good player before he came here. Anthony Miller didn't develop into a very good player. David Montgomery, again, I think he's good, but it wasn't like he became a dominant running back in the NFL or anything like that. Like, there were so many other people in this offense who didn't really succeed. And again, I just think it points back to the biggest thing being Matt Nagy not being a good teacher. He just wasn't. He was so obsessed with his offense, his super complex offense that takes 18 years to learn, apparently. And he was unwilling to compromise his offense to fit his players' skill sets. It's the same, and it's not just with Mitch. It was last year with Justin Fields. How many times did you and I, Frank, yell on this podcast, let Justin Fields roll out, get him outside the pocket? It was the same thing with Mitch. The offensive line was not good enough to run Matt Nagy's super complicated 7-step drop offense. Like, it just didn't work. And he kept doing it. And yeah, I do feel for Mitch to a certain extent, because he does seem like that guy who wouldn't really go against a coach. He's definitely more of the team first guy as opposed to a me first guy, which isn't bad, but you need your quarterback to step up, especially when your entire offense is struggling, and say, hey, this isn't working. And Mitch just never did that, at least from what we've heard and what we've seen. It's just very frustrating that Mitch didn't try to put himself into the best possible position to succeed. And it seems like he may be getting that opportunity in both Buffalo and Pittsburgh, both organizations, by the way, Frank, who have, produced some pretty good fucking quarterback play in the last 40 years.
Yeah. Well, now that you said that, I think that's sort of an indictment on Mitch too, though. At a certain point, you have to put your foot down.
That's what I'm saying.
Because because the thing is, I guess my retort is going to it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it wound up being a really bad thing. I think in the beginning you like listening to the coaches, but once you realize this isn't working, you got to do something. Yeah. I don't know exactly what that means in an NFL locker room or an NFL team. I don't think you go to the GM and advocate for someone to be fired, but something has to give, because make no mistake, we years 2 and 3, granted, we had our critiques for Nagy, but I think we still saw him as like a competent person. Year 4, it was like, no, year 3 for
we
sure.
were kind of out. Yeah.
Year 3 we're cut, but year 2, no. We blamed a lot of that on Mitch, and granted, he still deserved that. But if you know, again, like that just didn't play in his favor because he was getting, I would say, the majority of the negative press, the majority of the blame for a lot of this.
Oh yeah.
Because everyone just assumed that Nagy's still the guy that we got that was under Andy Reid. You know what I mean? It was just sort of that thing. So, yeah, I mean, I guess for the lack of a better way to put it, is like grow some fucking nuts. Hopefully he has, because you like, can you imagine that happening to Patrick Mahomes or Tom Brady or like any? And again, not to like say that's what he could have been, but you were the first quarterback taken off the board. Like what?
And Frank, this what we're saying, to me at the very least, and I don't know how our listeners feel about this, but to me this isn't like some crazy reach that you and I are making. I mean, confidence issues have constantly been brought up with Mitch, especially when he was here in Chicago. He talked about having to turn he couldn't have the TVs on. And granted, like that wasn't a great look, and the team should have never let that get that far. But this isn't stuff we're making up. We're not revisiting history. We're not re-looking at it or looking at it in hindsight. Mitch had a confidence issue. To me, he was never going to be a guy that walked into Matt Nagy's offense, slammed his playbook on the fucking desk and said, this isn't fucking working. We saw Nick Foles talking about it last year with Andy Dalton. We saw that. But those aren't the types of guys that are going to say that. You're right. You know, the great ones do. Tom Brady, Peyton Manning. Those guys took over their offenses. And the quarterback has to be the leader of their team, of the offense. That is how it works. At least for the best teams. You think of Joe Burrow, you think of Justin Herbert, like those types of guys. Mitch needed to do something. He needed to say, this isn't working, instead of just trying to make it work, because it just wasn't, and it didn't. And again, he goes to two organizations, again, who have produced quarterbacks. Buffalo Bills have very good track records with quarterbacks, Frank. Same with Pittsburgh Steelers. Like, they know what they're doing. So it doesn't surprise me that the Bears just were like, yeah, let's just keep trying to make this fucking work, even though it's just not going to. So again, this points to, yes, was Matt Nagy a bad coach? Yeah, he was. But it's also true that that Mitch Trubisky wasn't a good quarterback while he was here. And granted, maybe he did grow in a different organization. Maybe he is taking those steps as a leader. I hope he is, because honestly, Frank, as a quarterback here, he was definitely not the worst one you and I have ever seen. We've seen much worse, especially worse personalities too. Like, Mitch is a good guy, so I do hope that he has some success elsewhere. But if that does happen, it's not going to be because he was always good. It's going to be because those organizations know how to develop players. I think it's that simple.
You know what though? With all that said, and then we can move on. But he's going to lose that job if he even gets it. Kenny Pickett's going to take over. Yeah. Week 6.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, he's not like, maybe you saw things in film study and this and that. I don't really know. To me, doing things at that level, at that speed, sometimes it's either you have it or you don't. Like, you can study as much as you want. Like, they were talking about Zach Wilson on a podcast that I listened to, and how he like studies, like he was like Tom Brady called him, and it was like a Friday night at 9 p.m. to see what he was doing. He was like at the war room still studying. It's like, it doesn't matter if you can't read defense. You sure, like, on paper you can do it, but the problem with Mitch was that, and we saw this all the time with the Packers, they love doing this. They do this to everyone, and the good quarterbacks see right through it. The bad ones don't. They do post snap. They
bluffs.
Yeah, just the bluffs and things like that, where it's like it looks like a cover 2. All of a sudden,
disguises.
All types of disguises. And he was never able to pick up on that. That was what defenses constantly did to him. He didn't know who was blitzing. He didn't know what was he was lost. And I really don't think that's something you can improve on, because that's like a real time thing. The only time you get those reps is in a real game. And if you haven't adjusted already, I don't think you ever will. I don't think you can.
Yeah, and again, I think that goes back to coaching too. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It really doesn't. I mean, he just wasn't taught how to do it. They drafted him on pure raw talent, which again, arguable at best that he was the most raw talented quarterback, because in my opinion, that was still Patrick Mahomes. But Deshaun Watson, all the other stuff, I think was still the most talented quarterback. Pro ready at that time. Again, I just think it just didn't work. It could be both things, but we saw that with Mitch, right? Like the play, he thought he saw something, he thought he saw cover two. It ended up being a safety blitz, and that's why when the play broke down, you almost were like hoping it would, because that would lead to him using his athletic skills to get out of the pocket to make something crazy happen, as opposed to doing the 7-step drop when he had no protection because the offensive line was bad. But yeah, no, I don't think it's one or the other, but ultimately I'm not surprised by Mitch feeling like he was kind of tied at the hands in Matt Nagy's offense. It's just really not that surprising.
Agreed. And hopefully we never bring up Mitch Trubisky or Matt Nagy again. But I thought it was an interesting article.
It was, and that's a live reaction too. Frank just brought that up and was like, "We're gonna get into this." And I said, "Okay, all right," and we did. Frank, a lot of other news going on. Offensive line. We're just talking about them a little bit. Lucas Patrick, broken thumb. It sounds like he might be missing at least maybe most, if not all, of training camp at the center position. Sounds like the Bears are going to have to kind of rework that offensive line. Big surprise. Sam Mustipher, could be in line to start at center. Doug Kramer, the rookie 6th-round pick, could also be in line for that. But it also sounds like there's been some changes on the offensive line today in their first couple padded practices with Braxton Jones, their rookie 5th-round pick, starting at left tackle, while Larry Borum and Riley Reif are sort of rotating at right tackle. Before we get into the obvious name that I did not mention, I do want to get your thoughts on Braxton Jones starting. Basically, it sounds like he may have claimed the left tackle spot, while Larry Borum and Riley Reif are kind of duking it out for the right tackle spot. What do you think about that?
I mean, they may have just found a diamond in the rough, man.
Yeah.
Like, the one thing that I'm going to do, at least right now, is give Ryan Poles the benefit of the doubt when it comes to the offensive line. Because when you think about the one thing that Ryan Pace did really well on this team, it was build a defensive line. What position did Ryan Pace play? Defensive line. What position did Ryan Poles play? Offensive line. I think, and you could probably go down up and down the list of former players, at least through college, that are front office executives, you know what I mean, that play these positions, and they usually get it right because they have a real feel for that position.
Right.
So I have a hard time believing a first-time GM in his first year on a new team is like, you know what? Fuck it. We're reeling out a 5th-round pick at left tackle. He sees something that he really, really likes. That's not to say he's going to be dominant in year one or, all pro in the next couple of years, but like, that's pretty significant. Like, we have other options here. One that we'll talk about quite a bit in the next couple of minutes. But after what happened in the OTAs, him starting there, I certainly wasn't shocked. I figured he was going to man one of those tackles, at least starting training camp. And by all accounts, he's looked pretty good. Like, he hasn't looked bad at left tackle at all. Granted, he's not going up against Robert Quinn. He's not going against the best pass rusher on the team. But for a 5th-round pick, for you to establish yourself this soon, that's amazing. And I think people are really overreacting with the draft status because sometimes you just find something. Think about Philip Lindsay on the Texans a few years ago. He was undrafted and beat out Royce Freeman, who was their 3rd-round pick. It happens sometimes. People fall through the cracks.
Elijah Mitchell beating out Trey Sermon.
Elijah Mitchell, that's what I'm saying. Arian Foster, one of the best, if not the best, undrafted rookies of all time. Like, this happens sometimes, man.
Kirk Cousins being better than like literally half the first round that was drafted that year.
Russell Wilson.
Yeah, Russell Wilson.
Pick, beating out their paid a fucking boatload to in Matt Flint. Like, this happened. And it's not to say that means that this is going to work out. But people freaking out like, oh my God, we're depending on this 5th-round pick. This isn't like foreign. This happens. There's fifth round. I mean, especially in the trenches where, guys who don't have the sexiest names because they're not the skill positions. Right out of the gate, you see on offense and defense, like, oh, here's the guy that drafted in the 6th round with his 3rd sack of the game.
Charles
like,
Leno Jr. was a 7th round pick.
Charles Leno was a 7th round. Like, this happens sometimes, man.
Yeah.
And not for nothing. I mean, he was pretty generally regarded as a 3rd or 4th rounder. So he fell to us kind of unexpectedly. Not to say that means, well, I just said disregard draft status anyway, but like, I really don't think people understand how deep NFL drafts are these days. Because when we were younger, once you got past the 3rd round, you were just taking flyers on guys. It was very rare that it was an impact player. Now the expectation is for the first 4 draft picks in the first 4 rounds to be impact players. And I wouldn't doubt that the expectation as things start to evolve is like, we need a starter in the round, in the 5th round too. Eddie Jackson was a 5th round guy. Like this,
Darnell Mooney, the Super Bowl winning wide receiver, 5th round pick.
That's what I mean. Like Khalil Herbert last year, 6th rounder. Like this happens. Like there's a lot of talent on these boards. And I hope he just, to be honest with you, like my last thought with that is like, I hope he just solidifies it.
I know.
Let's get this discussion out of the way. Let's let him man left tackle. There it is. He's gone. Now let's figure out the rest.
Yeah. I'm tired of talking about the left tackle spot in Chicago.
Same.
Like we've and granted, I'm not blaming anyone for it's a serious concern. But if they found a guy that can just be that rock, be that starter, be that, just anchor on the left side, like good, let's fucking do it. And let's start figuring out the right tackle spot. I was really surprised, actually, Frank, that Riley Reif seems to be sort of in a camp battle with Larry Borom. Again, granted, it's not, they never said it's 100% certain that Braxton Jones is the left tackle. They could just be giving him a run of a couple days and just seeing what it looks like with the pads on. But that kind of tells me sort of where their what they want to see happen. Obviously, Riley Reif was brought in on a cheap contract, 1-year deal, but Larry Borom was a guy that I think most Bears fans were like, regardless if it's left tackle or right tackle, we saw enough last year, he will be a starter. And to me, I think it's pretty interesting that Ryan Poles is basically saying, and again, I think this kind of leaks into the next to the other guy we're going to talk about. Ryan Poles, much like throughout the entire process since he interviewed, is basically, I don't fucking care what you think about anything. This is my team. I'm going to build it the way I want to. He doesn't care what you think about Velus Jones's age. He doesn't care what you think about Byron Pringle being the 2nd pick or the 2nd wide receiver. He doesn't care. He believes he knows what he's doing. And God damn, I love that conviction. I really, really, really do. And so I like that he's not just giving Larry Borom a spot and he's saying, I know football better than you do. I'm going to find an offensive line that makes the most sense. And that's what I'll say about Larry Borom. Like, I do think he will be a starter, but it can't just be tossed in the trash that he's going up against Riley Reif, someone who has an NFL veteran on the offensive line. Like, it's not for nothing for sure.
Yeah, well, and I think the other thing that's pretty significant about this is he has not swapped them at all since OTAs. Larry Borom has been on the right side. He hasn't gone the left, and he played a little bit of left last year. He did not. In training camp or in OTAs or in training camp thus far, Braxton Jones has been on the left side. Larry Borom has been on the right side the whole time. So, again, they see something, whether that means that they're good on those sides or they're just the best option on the team right now, which is clearly not mutually exclusive. But you get what I'm saying? Like, they see something.
There's one last thing I want to say, and then we'll get into the gigantic, big, scary elephant in the room. Just because most teams run with 5 offensive linemen does not mean that if Larry Borom is a starter, Riley Reif won't play. It sounds like this offense is going to be geared towards the run anyways. They may go with 6 offensive line pretty frequently. That just might be how they run their offense, especially because their tight ends really aren't known for blocking. Ryan Griffin probably is more known for blocking than obviously Cole Kmet is. But they may go with a heavy offensive line. That just might be how it operates. But Frank, I think we've delayed as much as we possibly can. So let's get into the obvious. Teven Jenkins, ton of rumors swirling. He hasn't practiced in 5 days. Sounds like he's on the trade block. At the very least, teams have been calling, asking about that. I don't know if Ryan Poles is going out of his way to make those calls. It's just hard to really see a future for Teven Jenkins with the Bears, right? Do you first of all, what were your first thoughts when you saw that teams were calling about him, and sort of where's your head at now, with Teven Jenkins moving forward?
I think he's as good as gone. I don't think, again, the biggest thing that Ryan Poles said when he was hired was he evaluated the offensive line, and he absolutely kept it a buck when he talked to George. He said, they're not physical enough. They're not good enough. That's the first place that we're going to fix. That's my focus, because that's what wins you ball games. That's what makes your offense tick. I know everyone wants fucking prime OBJ and wants us to trade every draft pick for Jamar Chase to get Justin Fields weapons. None of that matters without an offensive line. It's just, it is what it is. And I think, the initial reports with OTAs with him running with the second team and such, it caught me off guard, because the one thing that, and then this was sheer projection. We didn't know this. We just assumed this. When he said they need to be nastier and tougher, and I was like, well, me and you were both like, he's gonna fucking love Teven Jenkins then, because that was the book on him coming out. That was what he was the only one who stuck up for Justin Fields last year, and we dogged Jermaine Ifedi, which I stand by. But we also weren't the ones evaluating the film like they were. They see something in him that they do not like. And now reports little by little are starting to come out that he is a little bit immature. Ryan Poles does not come across to me like he wants immaturity on an offensive line. Just look at the vets that he signed. Look at their press conferences. Look at the way that they speak. Look at the way that they handle themselves. But the biggest thing, Jack, and I saw this, I didn't get a chance to so you're going to get, so if you haven't seen this, you're going to get you guys are going to get another live reaction from Jack here. One of the things that came out from his college days was he does not respond very well to tough practices. That he just starts to, you see him start to phase out a little bit. He starts to dog it. He doesn't he almost wants to fake hustle his way through a hard practice. And it got so bad that a regional scout told one of it was an undisclosed NFL team. They were like, get him off your board right now. There's no shot we're even coming close to this kid. I don't care about the worries about injuries. I don't care about the worries about, because one of the things was he has a smaller, lower, his legs were small is what people were saying. His base is, I don't think that scares too many people away, but they were like, we don't care about that. What we see from him in practice consistently, no, he can't do it. You couple that, Jack, with what we know, not what we think, not what we heard, what we know that Matt Eberflus does is he fucking practices his teams hard. The Colts defense talked about it and they loved it. The players who bought in loved it. Shaquille Leonard loved it. So you think about the guys right now, Jalen Johnson, he's holding us accountable. We're going to be in condition. You hear all these things. You couple that report with what's happening. This is starting to make total sense right now. Whether or not he's talented and can be good somewhere else, if you're not a fit for a team, you're not a fit for a team. It is what it is. It's just it happens that way. It's I brought up OBJ for whatever reason a few times on this podcast. Just because he wasn't a fit with Cleveland doesn't mean he wasn't a good player still. Just it was what it was. He went to LA, he wound up being still pretty good. But I don't think he's a culture fit for this coach and this front office. Now the people who are going nuts about we drafted him in the second round, we're going to end this podcast with some guys that sort of the make or break year. He was going to be on that list, but the biggest thing is they didn't draft him in the second round. They don't care if he was a first round pick, a 15th round pick, if his mom's on the staff. They did not draft this kid. They're not married to anyone on this roster, Teven Jenkins included, especially because, and maybe no fault to him, but he didn't play. He played 5 games last year. So it's like people are acting like he just came in at left tackle and hunker, even though we like what we saw the last 3 games. I'm not trying to act like I was always out on Teven Jenkins. I'm not necessarily out on him now, but I'm just saying this makes sense to me, as to what's unfolding. I mean, do you have similar thoughts, Jack?
Yeah, Frank, if I'm Ryan Poles, first thing I'm doing is calling up Ryan Pace and say, give me a second. Give me a 2, and he can be on the Falcons. I'll send him to you right now for a 2. Because that's what Ryan Pace apparently felt he was worth. So go get that second from him. But it just really pisses me off that not only did Ryan Pace draft a guy with a back injury to be his left tackle or right tackle. At the time, we thought it was probably going to be right tackle, but they sort of needed him to be left tackle because he decided to cut their best left tackle for nothing, because he just couldn't fucking manage the goddamn salary cap, Frank. Instead, he drafted a guy who with a bad back and a maturity problem and traded up to do so because, Ryan Pace had a great track record for trading up. Great track record. Mitch Trubisky, that pick worked out great. He couldn't stand the thought of Mitch going number 2 to not the Bears. He couldn't have Deshaun Watson. He couldn't have Patrick Mahomes. Come on. And how could he possibly not trade up for Anthony Miller? How could he do that? Couldn't possibly miss out on a guy like that. It's just it bums me out that Ryan Pace is the reason that this Bears rebuild or reload or whatever the fuck this team wants to call it is going to take even longer because he just couldn't help himself but draft bad players in the first couple rounds. Didn't he trade up for Adam Shaheen? Am I making that up, Frank?
Did
he trade up for him, or did he just draft him in the second round over George Kittle?
He might have, but he traded up for Leonard Floyd too.
He did trade up for Leonard Floyd. You're absolutely right. He did. And granted, Leonard Floyd was good against the Packers. That was the one thing he was good at.
Yeah.
And then he goes to a team in the Rams that have other talent, and he ends up being a pretty good linebacker, Frank. Pretty good.
Well, and he traded up for David Montgomery.
He did. He did. He traded
when
up
there
for
was Damian Harris. Like the one thing, remember when Avram was here and he said that NFL teams should be liquidated or I forget what it was if they draft a running back in the first round. If you trade up for a running back,
if you trade up for one, you should.
I feel the same exact way. That talent is all there. And I like Monty. I think he's a good player. What does he do?
Nothing. He's Matt Forte light. He does everything well, but just not everything well enough.
But even just comparing it to the guy who was there later in that round, Damian Harris. I think Damian Harris is a better pure runner than him.
Yeah.
Monty probably has better hands, but again, this is 3rd round running back talent. They're from round 2 on. They're all the same.
You gotta contextualize it too. The Bears were running back away from the Super Bowl, as we saw here. They needed David Montgomery to really just push them over the fucking edge of beating the Packers and the Patriots and all those other good teams that they didn't beat.
But I think
Frank, it just Teven Jenkins overall. It's just so maddening that again, a guy that you and I were actually pretty happy with that they drafted. We thought he was killing that draft. We did. He got Justin Fields. He got Teven Jenkins. And it doesn't work in the system that the Bears are trying to run. And guess what, Frank? That's okay. That's okay. I'd rather this team is not good enough to try and fit a second round pick in if he doesn't want to be here. It's that simple. Find the best combination that works to let your quarterback continue to develop. I don't care about Teven Jenkins. I care about Justin Fields becoming an all-pro quarterback. That's what I care about. So if Teven Jenkins isn't going to be willing to put in the work to become part of that, bye. See you later. Get what you can. 3rd, 4th round, 5th round pick. Take what you can get at this point. There's no point in keeping him here.
And hearing the immaturity stuff, hearing his lack of, I don't know what the right word is. I guess grit. I feel so meatball.
Football motor, Frank.
Yeah,
football
motor from him. Think about some of the stuff we've heard from Jalen Johnson this year, who is a very good corner, saying, I haven't earned my spot on this team yet. I know I have to prove myself all over again to a new front office because they didn't draft me. Like hearing how much he loves the hard work that Eberflus has them doing. Knowing, I don't want to say knowing because it hasn't been like super confirmed, but the sources were pretty fucking good. They've been right on quite a bit. Assuming that's true with Teven Jenkins, what do you expect? Like you came in with the new regime and thought like they owed you this starting job?
Yeah.
That's why I'm disappointed because I still think talent-wise he's really good. I loved just how ugly and nasty he gets at tackle. I think that's what you need. You need that sort of,
See, and that's what surprises me, Frank. If he is that type of dude, you'd think he'd be first in line for hard practices, but it's just not.
I agree.
It's just not him. It's just not him.
Maybe it's one of those things where like something switches when it's game day.
Yeah.
But again, if you are in year 4 or 5 with the same regime and they sort of get it at that point, you know what I mean? Where it's like maybe you're not the best practice player, when those lights get on, you're out there. Okay, fine. They can live with that. I'm positive every wide receiver after year 5 that has their second contract is like that. Practice, they're like, go out for one hand. Game day, they're here, right?
Yeah.
But dude, you're in year 2, really year 1.5. You barely played last year.
Yeah.
Most of that was rehab. And again, that's not his fault. I'm not blaming him, but I'm just saying you would like, if you didn't think you had to prove yourself to this new regime, you were kidding yourself. Because there were a ton of question marks about you after last year still, even though I still like him. I can't reiterate that enough. I'm not like flip-flopping on anything. I want him to be a starting tackle on this team, left or right. But clearly there's a disconnect between this front office and him. And it sounds to me like it's more on him based on what other players on this team are saying about this staff so far.
Yeah.
Even Justin Fields, just talking about the differences between last year and this year.
There's a quote that I'm going to read you real quick. It's very short. It's from the Bears special team coordinator, Richard Hightower. He said, if a guy has his helmet on, Matt Eberflus wants everybody working. And I really think it's that simple, Frank.
Yeah.
If you're able to practice, you're going to practice, and you're going to practice hard. I mean, you hear how much conditioning work they're doing, regardless of who had a successful day in terms of offense or defense. Everybody is working because he understands that his team, they may not be the most talented team in the NFL, but it's very cliche, but he's going to make sure that they're one of the hardest working teams in the league. And that can get you 2, 3 extra wins that maybe you shouldn't get because your team was willing to work a little bit harder than the other team. It sounds stupid because maybe your team maybe isn't as talented, but that's why some of those teams like Jacksonville can beat the Indianapolis Colts in week 18 to get to to keep the Colts out of the playoffs, because one team is willing to work hard. Everybody but me went into that game like, oh, Indy's got this in the fucking bag. But Frank, I told you. I don't think this is going to be that easy. And it ended up being true because Jacksonville was willing to work harder than the Colts were. It really was that simple. So yeah, maybe it is a little bit more meatball-y type thought process, but sometimes these phrases exist, Frank, because they're just true. It is what it is.
But I think, Jack, it only gets meatball if we're in year 3 or year 4 of this system and the talent hasn't caught up to the hard work. Like right now, this team needs to outwork people to win some ball games. Maybe not against the Texans or the Lions, sort of the lesser teams in the league. But if we're going up against a playoff team, the way to beat them is to want it more, is to outwork them, is to do things they're not willing to do. Again, that's year 1. That's when we're talent deficient. Year 3, year 4, the hope is you built that culture of hard working. And now we have more Shaq Leonards in the building. We have Roquan Smiths in the building. We have weapons for Justin Fields on the outside. Like that talent sort of catches up to, the blue collaredness, if you will, of this football or of the team's culture.
The Lions have a 17% chance more of winning the division than the Chicago Bears do, because God, I don't get it. I don't understand, Frank. I just don't get it. I don't get how, what did they arguably upgraded the fucking coaching staff, Frank, but they're still worse than the Lions? I don't get it. I don't get it. But as Frank mentioned a little bit earlier, there are a couple guys that we did want to get into regarding more of a make or break season. Like he said, Teven Jenkins was going to be on that list.
He was number one. He was going to be number one. He was
number one. He is number one, but we're going to have to push that list back a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. So Frank, I'm going to start with just an honorable mention, because when we're making this, he wasn't on the team. I just want to talk about him a little bit because I've liked some of the mindset that he's come into this camp with. And if he can be a red zone weapon, great. If not, they didn't really pay a whole lot. N'Keal Harry, we talked about the trade for him. This is, I think, clearly a make or break season for him just overall. I think it's hard for me to see how a wide receiver that talented just completely fell off the map. And from what I've heard, it sounds like New England was more of the problem. And we've seen that, Frank. We've seen that so many times, especially for offensive players, where they come in and the system just doesn't really make sense to them. It's a little too, it doesn't necessarily fit their skill set. If N'Keal Harry, all he has to do, Frank, all he has to do is what he did in practice today when Justin Fields missed him by 80,000 feet. And I'm convinced that Mitch was throwing back there, if I'm being honest with you. Get open in the red zone and catch some touchdown passes. I think if he just does that, he could be a very effective player in this offense. I'm not asking him to go out there and become Randy Moss 2.0. I just need another red zone weapon on this offense. And I think if he keeps putting in the work, I think he could potentially be a very valuable asset to this team, especially given how thin the wide receiver core truly is.
No, I totally agree. I mean, he's one of those guys that it's a no-brainer that you take a chance on him.
Yeah. Yeah, especially for what they paid.
Yeah, for what was it, a 24/7 or 25/7, whatever? Like, yeah,
24/7.
Because again, just like you said, he was a first-round pick. I mean, he's always had talent. And I'm not to say you were doing this, but it's, not to completely blame New England, because at the end of the day, you're still a first-round guy. You got to figure it out.
Right.
But again, I mean, Chad Johnson went there and talked about how fucking complex things were, and like the biggest reason why they win and why people succeed there is because they know how to do multiple people's jobs. They understand how to do. You think about the players who have succeeded there, it's like super high IQ. Not to say Chad doesn't have one. He just wasn't in the system for that long. But like they don't pop off year one.
Or you're Randy Moss and one of the greatest wide receivers of all time.
That's insanity. But it's like, they don't like, I don't even know what the right word is. It's like, they don't capitalize on people on what they can do. They're like, no, you're either going to do this or you're not a fit here.
Or we're going to trade you.
No matter where we drafted you on offense, defense, no matter what round, if you can't do what we're asking of you, that's it. And it's like, it almost makes me wonder, like, did they try to make N'Keal Harry something he wasn't? Because like, I know that offense really values route running. He's not a great route runner. His thing was getting, and granted, he missed way too many 50-50 balls for that to be a strength, but like that was his thing coming out of college. And that's why people had a red flag on him, was like, can he do that? He doesn't get very much separation. You hear the same thing out of all those guys that are built that way. Cortland Sutton, him, just the bigger dudes who don't get the separation. Yeah, exactly. Drake London, but like they're big and they're going to use their frame to do so. But like you said, if he can have, if he can just do that, because I mean, it's not like he got drafted to be wide receiver 4. He realistically could be number 2 on this team.
Yep.
And there's
opportunity
in front of him. Yeah, the opportunity's there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Frank, go ahead and kick us off on our official list. I just wanted to talk about N'Keal real quick.
I don't know if he made our official list or not, but the one I did want to talk about, since you brought up an honorable mention, is just David Montgomery. I know he was sort of floated around when we were talking about it, but I think he's a huge one. Because for as many people who want to keep him, and I'm not super opposed to that, the contract would have to be very team friendly just because of the position. But he hasn't like blown people's doors off. Like people talk about him like he's had like Anthony Jones types here. We've seen great running backs in Chicago. Anthony Jones, the A train, had a year or two. Matt Forte had like fucking 8 years of greatness. He's had 1,000-yard season.
Why didn't you talk about Thomas Jones?
I did say Thomas Jones. I said they act like he had
said
Thomas
the A
Jones
train.
type
Oh,
season.
I thought we were talking about.
And then I said Thomas Jones.
But you didn't say Sed Benson.
I didn't say Sed Benson, but he had like
Why didn't you bring up Jeremy Langford?
I mean, okay, now we're just getting in fucking line.
Jordan Howard. Come on.
Jordan Howard he had better years than fucking the guy who replaced him.
Yeah.
He had a 1,300-yard season one year. And I know we ran the ball a ton, but he's a fucking running back. And he did what was asked of him in those John Fox offenses. Like, David Montgomery is one of those dudes that, I think when you're looking at talent on any team, whether drafting, fantasy, the eye test is a big part of what happened. He's passed the eye test for 3 years, but he hasn't put together the other end of things where it's like, yeah, he looks super talented. He can break some tackles. He still hasn't given you that elite.
He kind of reminds me of a little bit. He kind of reminds me of like Miles Sanders. Like Miles Sanders is a dude who, when you actually watch him play, you're like, damn, this guy's really good. But then you like look at it's like the exact opposite of Russell Wilson's offense in Seattle, where it's like you watch the game and you're like, damn, Monty must have put up like 150 combined yards, and you look and it's like 27, and you're like, fuck game was I watching? And then, same thing with Miles Sanders, a guy who like had 5.5 yards per carry last year, but no touchdowns. And you're like, how? He's so good. I don't get it. But then you look at Seattle and Russell Wilson throws like a ball that goes like 15 yards, and apparently that equates to 250 yards in total offense. Like, so I just kind of see that comparison. I totally agree. I don't think David Montgomery, I think he's a good player, but this team is not good enough to warrant giving him a massive extension to a running back, especially, again, when you have guys who maybe were a little more effective last year in Khalil Herbert. Like, I agree with you, Frank. I agree.
I mean, that's my big thing. I almost, and this sounds bad, I like Monty, I do. I almost don't want him to have that great of a year because I don't want him to, like, why are we re-signing a running back, even on a team-friendly deal?
Yeah.
The drop-off between him and Herbert, as a matter of fact, I don't think it, just like you hinted at it, I don't think it was a drop-off. Herbert looked better in those, like, 3 or 4 games that he started. He looked, I mean, again, I don't think he has the hands that Monty does, but he looked like a faster Jordan Howard. Our only complaint with Jordan Howard is that he was slow. But the vision that he had, whereas, like, it's almost like Monty is like the flashier. He's going to break tackles in the backfield. He just looks athletic. Herbert was like kind of straight downhill. He found the hole. He hit it. He got to the second level, broke a tackle or ran somebody over and got you an 8-yard gain. Yeah. Like, that's all I want from my running back. I don't need, unless it's like again, like Christian McCaffrey, if he can stay healthy, Alvin Kamara, where it's like clearly they can do anything.
Yeah, if you get a Dalvin
running back position.
Yeah, if you get a Dalvin Cook, if you get one of those top tier dudes.
Just my, like, a running back that isn't that, give me Khalil Herbert, especially on a rookie deal. So again, it sounds bad, but I'm leaning heavily towards I don't want to re-sign him.
Yeah, I'm definitely kind of there myself, unless he has one of those just insane season where he, goes for 2,000 rushing yards or something crazy like that. But like,
I don't have the talent though.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, you have Khalil Herbert, who, granted, maybe not be the best pass catcher, but Frank, like, one of the bigger things was when Jordan Howard wasn't the main focus point, right? And you had Jeremy Langford as well. One of the big things was teams knew what the Bears were going to do because Jordan Howard was in the he was in the backfield, and then, or if Jeremy Langford was in, they're probably going to throw the ball. Okay, but guess what, Frank? Every team does it now. They have a guy who runs the ball hard, and then they have another guy who's more of the pass catcher. That's just how it works. Khalil Herbert, Treston Ebner, 2 guys that you and I are pretty high on this year because they're just going to be effective running backs. You don't need to have a 2,000-yard running back. You just don't, to be an effective offense in the NFL anymore. It's just, it doesn't matter. You have Leonard Fournette and Rashad White in their offense. Like, I agree with you. I agree.
Well, the last thing on, and then we can get to the official issue. Can kick us off. Is Justin Fields is the best runner on the team.
He's still the best runner on the team. Yeah. You don't even need the running back.
So that even if we're worried about rushing yards, get him on some bootlegs, draw up some design runs for him, and he can take care of at least a little bit of that. I know you don't want to get him hurt, but it's like we're discussing running backs, and it's like the guy who certainly not saying he should be a running back. That's not I'm just saying, like, legs wise, he has the best fucking legs on the offense. Like, we don't even have to worry about it.
Yeah. I mean, really, that really is that simple. You look at the Ravens and how they operated without J.K. Dobbins, one of their more talented running backs, and they had Devonta Freeman going off for being usable. Like, that's all you need when you have when your best runner is your quarterback. It changes the entire dynamic of your offense. So to go with the list, I don't believe, Frank, we have like a 1, 2, 3, especially with without the Teven. So I'm going to start with the least obvious one, in my opinion, and I want to talk about Darnell Mooney. And you may hear that name and say, all right, I'm stopping this podcast. These guys don't know what they're fucking talking about. Darnell Mooney is already a proven player. Granted, Darnell Mooney is a very good player. When I'm talking about with him, saying this is a make or break season, to me, Darnell Mooney has a legitimate opportunity to prove every Bears fan that believes he's a wide receiver 2 at best wrong. This is his chance. This is his chance to show that he's more than just a guy who can, possession receiver or a fast receiver. Prove to us that you can do it all and be a focal point, a star player in this offense, because the Bears desperately need him to be that. They don't have a lot of capital put into other wide receivers, Frank. They have one guy drafted in this new regime. I'm not going to mention the age thing because I just think it's stupid. But Darnell Mooney is a guy that has been working to build chemistry with Justin Fields since last year. So going into this season, I think Darnell Mooney is going to have a very good year. But what does that look like? Is it going to be garbage time stuff? Is it going to be just, those routes that are getting him open? Or is he the one that's really taking over this offense and just being a guy who you just constantly have to get the ball to? You can't afford not to get him the ball. So that's what I want to see. I want to see Darnell Mooney take his game to the next level and become that star wide receiver, and not just a guy who you're like, he's a nice piece. He's a nice piece to have. You can definitely keep building, but he's more of that, wide receiver 2 type role. So that's what I mean when I say this is a make or break season for Darnell Mooney.
Yeah, and I think the case with him is more like make or break adjacent, because I think his floor is very high, in this offense post this season. Meaning if he doesn't do that, we know he can still be a really good wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3. You know what I mean? Like if you surround him with maybe a possession guy or whatever. But I agree with you with what you're saying. Like, this is the year for you. Like, there's no one in front of you. You have all these reps with Justin Fields. You were the one putting in the time last year when Justin Fields wasn't getting those reps after practice. Now it's time for you to absolutely take over. And what that means, and I know we don't like to put numbers on things, but for him, you almost have to. That means 1,200, 1,300 yards, 5, 6, 7 touchdowns, doing things like that. Like, or even, I would even say, like, maybe even a transition to the guys, I've been, talking about a ton, and Nicole Kmet, who was on our list. Maybe that means the middle of the field is wide the fuck open, like Travis Kelce is, because teams had to worry about Tyreek Hill going downfield and taking the top off the defense. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
all of that plays into that. And again, I think that's a good segue into another guy on our list who I think is more of like the true make or break with Cole Kmet. This is, I think, a lot of the points you said about Darnell, or we both did, can be made about Cole. Like, no one's ahead of you now. You don't have the Jimmy Graham excuse. You don't have the Horsted was getting more reps than you excuse. You're the guy. And I get it. This is a new offense. We're all learning it. Eventually, when I was growing up, I would sort of have these things where, it's fucking, Jay's and the offense, it's a whole new OC, which to a degree you can make an excuse, but eventually talent just wins the fuck out, man. Eventually it clicks. Eventually it just goes. I'm sick of having those excuses. If he's not the guy for us, he's not. If he moves on and is great, next to Mark Andrews in Baltimore or something, so be it. But this year, I need you to do something. And again, unfortunately, numbers have to be into play. To me, that's like 900 yards. To me, that's to almost getting double-digit touchdowns. I know you had 0 last year, but you're really our only red zone threat right now, especially if N'Keal Harry is the bust that everyone says he is or that he was in New England. Let's just be real about it. He was a bust there. So you need to be the guy to step up. You're taking those reps from Jimmy Graham, who is no longer here anymore. I will fucking throw up in my mouth if O'Shaughnessy or Horsted or one of these dudes is getting fucking goal line reps over this guy. Because that to me means that this team saw the same shit that the last regime saw in him. Again, the last regime, we had our complaints, but they did certain things for a reason. And if they were right about Cole Kmet, they were just right about Cole Kmet. It is what it is. And it would almost be like reaffirming what they thought if similar things happened this year and people were taking reps from him.
I'll say it is what it is. I would be okay with that if he wasn't their first pick in the second round.
Course.
You know what I'm saying? But like, I totally agree with you. This team does not have a lot of size. Like it just really doesn't. Byron Pringle isn't the biggest guy in the world. Velus Jones really isn't either. Equanimous St. Brown, Daz Newsome, N'Keal Harry, like this wide receiver room just isn't very big. Cole Kmet, you're absolutely right, Frank. If they're going to be more successful in the red zone than they have been in the last fucking 10 years, like they need to have someone who's able to score in the red zone and get those big targets. And we saw a little chemistry developing last year, especially if you'll remember in that Steelers game too. Like, Cole Kmet was really good with Justin Fields. So I do want to see a little bit more of that. Obviously, the touchdown number should go up. But yeah,
get any lower.
Frank and I, like, if there is a mantra to this podcast, it's just show who you are, right? Like, if you're bad, be bad. If you're good, be good. Like, just stop. Enough with you're right, Frank. Enough with the excuses of, well, Jimmy Graham was that. Why was Jimmy Graham playing over Cole Kmet? If Cole Kmet was that good, Matt Nagy would have been dialing up plays for him. It's really that simple. It really is, because Matt Nagy was trying to save his job and win the best way he could. And he thought that Jimmy Graham was the better option. So, what does that tell you? Is Cole Kmet really going to take that step forward? I think it's something we'll have to see. And then the last one we wanted to talk about is Eddie Jackson. And this really isn't going to be a surprise for a lot of our listeners. They've heard us talking about Eddie for the last 3 years or so. He hasn't lived up to that contract. He's been hurt. When he's been playing, he hasn't been very good. The turnovers he was so good at in his rookie season have just completely disappeared. I'm hoping, Frank's hoping as well, that in a new defense, he'll be able to make that adjustment back to being more of that playmaker instead of being asked to hit people, which is not something that Eddie really was willing to do, even with the new contract. So, I don't really think there's a whole lot to say about Eddie. Make some plays. Make some fucking plays on the defense. Go back to being that difference maker in the secondary that you were. And Bears fans will embrace the hell out of you for doing so.
Yeah, I mean, no, just like you said when talking about Cole Kmet, and I said before that, like, first of all, I'm not going to make any more excuses for someone who's been here, who's gotten a second contract with the Chicago Bears. But two, you don't even have any to lean back on this year. You're going back to the position that got you paid in the first place.
Yeah.
So, and with defense, I've been talking about numbers offensive line. I don't think you can really do that. Some of it is the eye test. Some of it is like, are you around the ball when the ball's tipped? Are you know what I mean? Like that type of stuff. Are you making deflections, which is a statistic? But like, I'm not looking for like, yeah, we need 4 pick sixes and then 6 picks. That's insanity. But just the eye test of what we saw from the first 2 years of Eddie Jackson from every other year after that was vastly different. Even adding in the 1 or 2, whatever it was, pick sixes that got called back, one being a horrible penalty that shouldn't have been called. But like, even with that's one play. The whole rest of the year, it just wasn't it. So it's like a lot of it is going to be eye test. But again, with him specifically, but this applies still to everybody. This regime didn't draft you. Not only did they not draft you, they didn't pay you.
Yeah.
So they don't care about that. Like if you don't prove to them that you're still the guy that, they want to continue to pay, for the rest of your contract, they ate some of Khalil Mack's salary. I don't think they'll hesitate to do the same for you to get a higher draft pick. And they've already shown, we have a first round pick next year. Not to say they would draft a safety that early, but I'm just saying, like, we have all our picks next year. Even if he's on this roster, granted, I think we all wanted a corner, maybe like round 3 or 4, because we knew the only one we had was Jalen Johnson. Who's to say round 3 comes up next year again and there's a really good free safety out there?
Yeah.
That they don't scoop him up, because starters, especially at the secondary, they're to be had in rounds 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah, look at the Panthers drafting J.C. Horn over Justin Fields. I mean,
yeah,
those they come into hot commodity.
Yeah, no, but this regime doesn't owe Eddie anything. So like he has to really, and granted, that comes off really bad, but he's been one of the guys that when we're talking earlier about Teven Jenkins and such, he's been working. He understands that. He's not making excuses and like, well, this is a new thing. No, he's like, no, I'm going back to where I want to go. I love Jaquan Brisker. I love this new coaching staff. They don't know me shit. I'm here to work hard. He's been another guy. And to be quite honestly, and this is probably a great way to end it, to get your thoughts on this too. That's sort of what's disappointing about Teven Jenkins as well. If he came in with sort of that privileged mindset of like, oh, well, I got drafted 2nd round last year. They got to start me. Dude, this guy has his money already. He can sit on his ass and do nothing and get paid. He can just fucking mail it in, and he has generational wealth for him, his kids, his grandkids. He can invest it and do whatever the fuck he wants with that money. And he's in here saying, no, they don't owe me a goddamn thing. I'm ready to work hard. That is disappointing. It just clicked in my head with Teven Jenkins talking about Eddie Jackson.
I hope that's not the case. I really do. It sounds like there's a lot of evidence to kind of lean that way, that it is maybe something like that.
What else?
We don't know for sure. I agree.
You're just not telling us. Does he have the fucking monkeypox?
I think it's the monkeypox. There's there are 2 things that I do want to end the podcast on real quick. A guy that I don't think is make or break at all, but a guy that I just feel like we don't talk about enough is Travis Gibson. Frank, I'm like he's like a better Roy Robertson Harris to me. He's a guy I'm just so excited about to see what he can really do in a full-time role. And then the last thing, I just want to make a quick correction for our listeners, just so they're not confused. Roquan Smith is the Will linebacker. He is not the Mike. So that changes a lot of the conversation that Frank and I were having last week. Trade his ass. He doesn't need to be paid as the
Jesus.
But no, Roquan is still holding in, whatever the fuck you want to call it. It sounds like they may still be far apart on a deal. Hopefully that gets settled sooner rather than later. Because Frankie, preseason football is fucking here, man. We got the Hall of Fame game to worry about that I've never watched. You ever watch the Hall of Fame game? You ever just dropped in for a minute and say, hey, there's some football?
When I was younger and Urlacher was in his prime, I think we played like the Ravens that year for the Hall of Fame game. I watched like a half a quarter. You're like, no one's playing. Why am I watching this? At all. The way they build that thing up, I was like, oh man, like, are they going to take this serious for a half? No starter play.
Yeah, it's just it's weird. Like Trevor Lawrence is already like, I'm not playing that game. But there's Frank. I mean, we're coming up on some real football here pretty quickly. Obviously we'll talk a little more about the preseason schedule. I'm hoping there's some more camp stuff that comes through. I really do, in terms of, because Frank, we really haven't heard a lot in terms of guys starting to separate themselves in terms of starters and reserves. Granted, it just started. That's why we haven't heard that. But I do want to see if that offensive line is starting to settle. If Braxton Jones really is making a claim to the left tackle spot. And I want to know what that fucking wide receiver depth chart is going to look like. I want to have a better idea of who's going to be where, who's going to be doing what, and we'll kind of see.
I'm gonna make a prediction, Jackie, right here, right now. Make it here on that wide receiver depth chart. Number 1, Darnell Mooney. We know that
Okay.
Number 2, Velus Jones.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Number 3, Byron Pringle. Number 4, Equanimous St. Brown. That's going to be the 4.
That's going to be the 4.
Yep.
You heard it here first. You heard it here first from Frankie. We appreciate you guys listening as always. Check out our YouTube page. We appreciate the likes and comments we've been getting. A lot of activity there. Feel free to submit some questions that you have for us because Frank is tired of me just talking to him. He wants to interact with you a little bit more as well. But hit us up on Apple Podcasts. I think I got it that time. Spotify, we're there too. Until then, Frankie, I'll talk to you next week, man.
Absolutely. Later, Jackie. Later, everybody.